Hola, bienvenidos. Estoy preparándome para hacer un stream de Dear Esther, Landmark Edition, de Chinese Room y Curve Digital. Hello, welcome. I'm going to stream Dear Esther, Landmark Edition from Curve Digital and the Chinese Room. My lighthouse. Dos. ¿Cómo esto? Eso.
Hello everyone, I'm Dan Pinchbeck, I'm the creative director of the Chinese Room, and this is the Dear Esther Developers Commentary.
Hi, I'm Robert Briscoe. I'm the artist on Dear Esther.
And I'm Jessica Curry, and I was the composer on the game.
So what you're looking at today is a remake of a mod. Dear Esther started off in 2007 as a Half-Life 2 mod that did really, really well in the modding community, which was fantastic, and as a result of that attracted the attention of Rob, who worked as the primary developer on a Source remake of the game that was released in 2012. And this year is another remake where it's been updated for a cross-platform release, and we wanted to add in this developer's commentary just to give you a bit more of an insight into some of the ideas behind the game as it came together.
So you'll see around you in a lot of the environments, there's a lot of detail ingrained into everything. One of the things that I wanted to do with Dear Esther is bring the visuals up to the same kind of level of detail that Dan and Jess had put into the other areas of the game. So all of the history and the kind of hidden pieces of story that are intertwined with the VOs and the music and stuff, I kind of wanted to bring some of that into the environments. So if you look around you, you'll see that there's a lot of interesting bits and pieces, a piece of paper with someone's name on it, a photograph, an ultrasound. All of these little bits and pieces are kind of laid in to just kind of bring another aspect of the story into the game. And also, they're actually randomized, so every time you play, you'll see something different lying around. And this is just to build on this idea that everybody has a unique experience and a unique interpretation of the story. So you'll see around you in a lot of the environments, there's a lot of detail ingrained into everything. One of the things that I wanted to do with Dear Esther is bring the visuals up to the same kind of level of detail that Dan and Jess had put into the other areas of the game. So all all of the history and the kind of hidden pieces of story that are intertwined with the VOs and the music and stuff. I kind of wanted to bring some of that into the environments. So if you look around you, you'll see that there's a lot of interesting bits and pieces, a piece of paper with someone's name on it, a photograph, an ultrasound. All of these little bits and pieces are kind of layered in to just kind of bring another aspect of the story into the game. And also, they're actually randomized, so every time you play, you'll see something different lying around. And this is just to build on this idea that everybody has a unique experience and a unique interpretation of the story.
Let's see if I can go to playa.
Part of the point about the whole game, I think, was this idea that rather than having a linear, straight-through version of the story, that we could have multiple story units for each place you were. And I was really interested in this idea of how you can open up that space that people can interpret. So I loved the idea that you could have two people that had played this game and then would have a conversation about it, and one of them would say, oh, what did you think about when this happened? And the other person would be like, well, that didn't happen for me. I had a completely different event happen or a completely different story happen. And it kind of feels very gamey in that way, that actually one of the things I love about writing for games is that you hand over so much control to the player that it becomes their story, and that's really, really important rather than trying to force them. So using randomised blocks of voiceover in the game and the kind of randomised prop details that Rob was talking about means that it gives it a really different feeling every time you go through. And that's kind of interesting for me, because I like the idea of going, well, not everyone has to have the same experience, and because it's interactive, you have the capacity to have very different experiences occupying the same space. So yeah, but balancing all that then becomes an absolute nightmare.
I think it's nice though, because everybody gets a personal experience. Like, I love reading the forums and seeing how people come and they sort of tell their story and what they interpreted of it, and then you see other people discussing what they thought of it. And to me, it's kind of nice because everybody takes something unique away from it.
When I wrote the music for the mod of Dear Esther, there was absolutely no budget whatsoever for live players, so all the music was sampled. But one of the good things about that is it actually forced me to be quite creative about how I wrote the music. So with my background in sound art, I wanted to use samples in a different way that wasn't just using it to sound like a violin. I wanted to time stretch and manipulate samples to make something different and strange and quite unique. But then when we got the Indie Fund money, I had the amazing opportunity to re-record the music with live players. And that was so exciting for me, actually, because that's where it comes to life. And I thought long and hard about whether to write new music, going from the mod to the commercial version. But actually, I decided that my initial and original emotional response to the game was probably going to be the strongest response and reaction that I had. So I just literally, the music that I'd written for samples, I then wrote out for live instruments. But what they bring to it is transformative, actually. And I think The Beach is a really good example of this, where, you have these awful samples soaring away, and then you have the string quartet playing this very bleak, very sparse music, and they bring the presence of the island immediately to it, and it comes to life. And that's the exciting thing about it. It wasn't a huge budget, but just having that experience of working with the players was just magical.
So people have asked why the Dear Esther's set on a Hebridean island. What's really interesting about this is it's one of those times when your kind of aspirations as an artist and the practical realities kind of dovetail. We knew that we had to have some way of limiting the player from disappearing off the play space, and when we made the original, it was a mod, and because it was a Half-Life 2 mod, you kind of had Eastern European city, spaceship, or blasted, desolate landscape, were your three options if you didn't want to start making any other assets. So it started off with these practical constraints. We don't want to set it on a spaceship, we don't want to set it in an Eastern European city, so it's got to be on.
One of the things you're always trying to do as a composer is create memorable themes. And a slight confession is that probably the most memorable theme, which is Remember in Dear Esther, wasn't actually created for the game. Rob's looking shocked. So it was actually from a piece of choral music that I'd written years before, based on a Christina Rossetti poem called Remember. And one of the things I was talking about earlier was how I didn't have any budget. So I had this piece of choral music, and I thought, hang on, this is absolutely perfect for Esther, but I don't want to use all of it. So the only bit that you actually get in the game is the first line of the choral piece of music. But that actually went on to form the main theme of the music that I wrote.
White Lines.
Yeah.
They actually did this. It was really cool. I found this historical document. They used to do this on Boré and the Hebrides. If their disease broke out,
Really?
they'd actually chip out and expose the chalk. So if you're on a boat and you were coming to the island, you know not to land because it was infectious, which is the coolest, most amazing. It's one of those things where you go, it's almost impossible as a writer to come up with something as cool as that. It just has to be something that was actually done. And it's so sad as well. And I love this bit and the fact that we can do it because it feels really real because it references a real thing. And I don't know, there's something really special about that. But it was always one of those bits in the game that I thought, we've got to be able to represent this somehow. We have to be able to get these things in here.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. Something that I wanted to bring through in the art of the game was the same kind of fidelity that you find in both Jessica's music and Dan's writing. In the same kind of way that you have all of these little details, these very close attentions to detail that kind of really bring richness to the story. And something that was missing in the original mod version was just...
There's a scene in Donnie Darko where Drew Barrymore's playing his English teacher, and she talks about cellador as being the most beautiful word in the English language, and about it's the sound of the words together. And Dear Esther actually comes from the introduction to From a Faith No More song, the Crab song on the first album, Introduce Yourself. And there's a point where, I think it's Chuck at that point as the vocalist before Mike Patton, just says, Dear Esther. And it really lodged with me because the sound Dear Esther just has a really amazing sound to it. And I think when we started making it, and the idea of it being this series of letters to someone came through, it just came straight back out of going, that's just a really beautiful sounding combination of words. And I think that really sums up the whole approach to the writing in Dear Esther of what's the most beautiful combination of words and images we can put together, and to do it. I think the central question to the entire experience for most people that have played it or are talking about it is this idea of, is the island real? Is what's going on a literal event of a man walking across a Scottish island, or is it a dream that he's had? Does the island even exist? And one of the things that we try to do with the writing is to constantly lull the player into a position where they got an understanding, they made a decision about what they thought was going on, and then to undercut it. So you never actually were able to settle on any one interpretation. And that was the challenge I set myself when I wrote the original mod, was can we put a story in a game that not only lends itself to multiple interpretations, but there is no stable interpretation. Every single interpretation you have will always have questions, and you'll never be able to fully trust what you think you understand about the game. So it's challenging, I think, for that result. It becomes quite a challenging kind of game story because of that, because you don't ever get that situation to go, I understand it now, I can walk away from this thing and it's all closed off and it's tidy. It was a very deliberate attempt to say, no matter where you think you are with this story, you're always questioning whether or not that's right.
One of the things that's been most commented on with the audio and the music in Dear Esther is how sparse it is. And that was a really deliberate tactic. I wanted to leave room for the player to think and to dream and to wonder and to put their own interpretation into what was happening. And I think the problem with so much modern media is how bombarded we are constantly. It's the kind of MTV, flash in your face, constant music. And Dan and I watch a lot of drama together, and that really is constant
Endless,
music.
which is constantly telling you what you should feel, like really clearly, and it's like being kind of beaten up by the music sometimes.
And when you read a lot of reviews of Dear Esther, a lot of people say they had this time to think and to interpret, and that was one of their favourite things, that they placed themselves so direct.
So there's a lot of places in the game where you see a lot of strange things, and this is very deliberate. One of the things we wanted to do is just kind of like not spoon feed the player every little piece of story. We kind of just, some things are literally just in there to just kind of let you think and let you decide on whatever you want to bring to the story yourself. So it's kind of like I approached it like an impressionist painting, where you've got like this kind of very vague outline of things, but if you stare at it enough, you can kind of like fill in the spaces, and kind of the image comes together on its own. So a lot of these kind of strange pieces of geography and stuff, that's really kind of deliberate in some ways, just to kind of keep the player's mind open and kind of bring their own interpretations of the story through that.
When I was originally thinking about how to write the music for the game, I suddenly realised that you don't see anybody in the game, and the most important character as such is the island itself. So one of the things that I did with the music was to write the island as if she or he were a character in its own right. And that's really important, I think, that you're going through this space and actually it's completely devoid of people. But the
All right, let's talk about walking. Let's do it. We're gonna address the elephant in the room, the very, very slow-moving elephant in the room. So this might be a longer conversation because it kind of fits with that. So Esther was the first of the what are now called walking simulators, and it was really interesting that for us it didn't feel that weird to have a game that was slower than normal, where actually there was lots of time to just walk around and think and look at things. And it was amazing at the time how this was seen as completely revolutionary, and it's really interesting, and it's amazing to see how many other games have kind of like taken it on board. For me, it came from, I didn't see it as being odd to have a game where very little happened, where you thought about what you were doing. For me, it was kind of interesting that you could play some of the best moments. The radio mast in Dear Esther was obviously there as a really important kind of design feature, as well as its place within the story. And that, I think, came from, it's really interesting, it being a Half-Life mod to begin with, and the Citadel in Half-Life 2, that it tells you how far you are through the game. You're always looking up to the skyline, am I closer to the Citadel, can I see it? And it lets you know how near you are to the end of the game. And it was really important because Esther's so open in a way, and because there isn't this, you're not using kind of shootouts or kind of gating it with combat encounters to kind of constantly keep you moving. That it was really, really important that you always had that focal point of going, I know exactly from the beginning of the game, virtually right from the start, you know where you're going, you know where the game's going to end up, and you know that sooner or later you're going to be either at the base of that thing or climbing that thing, and it's all...
So something you'll notice as you look around the environment is, you know, from a distance you see the landscape. It's kind of a beautiful place in some ways, but something I wanted to bring to the game was that there's this second layer beneath the surface, whereas if you look at things closely, you see that the actual island itself is very polluted. It's kind of very rotten. You know, everywhere you look, every rock, every grass surface, it has this layer of filth on it, and it's kind of been put in there just to kind of emphasize further that this...
We cast and did all the voice direction for Esther ourselves for the mod, and it was basically Jess and I on a casting website just listening to people's show reels and finding what's the voice of this thing. And there was never any question about Nigel. I think we heard his show reel for the first time around. It's probably been listened to sort of 30 or 40 actors. And we started listening to his show reel and just both looked at each other and went, that's it, that's him. And it was amazing when Nigel came in. We had, I think, a day and a half to do the whole thing. And he just did that amazing thing that really, really great actors did. If he just walked in, got in front of the microphone, and more or less did the entire thing in one take. And we did hardly any retakes on anything. It just felt like his instinct for the character in the game was so strong that he just, without virtually any direction, just came in and just got it. And one of the hardest things with the voiceover that we did was when we went from the mod, which had 3 potential narrative units per queue, to 4 potential narrative units per queue, was not only finding new bits of writing that kind of complemented and played off what was there in the original mod, but for Nigel to come back in, nearly 5 years later, and to just re-find that voice in exactly the same way and deliver it in a way that fitted in and complemented it was a real testament to his ability as an actor, I think. That apart from we had spent quite a lot of time trying to make the sound actually sound the same in terms of mic placement and things like that, but in terms of the actual delivery of those new monologues, you wouldn't know that was both written and acted sort of 4.5 years after the original thing was done. So the one person who's not in the room sort of today but deserves a huge amount of credit for how the game kind of eventually was delivered, but also I think in terms of how the game has lasted, a huge amount of respect needs to go to Nigel Carrington for his work on it.
One of the really important jobs of a composer, I think, is to provide the player or the listener with different emotional tones and states. And up until this point in the game, the music has been very sparse, very intimate, and very isolating in a way. But the island is also a beautiful and magnificent place, and what I wanted to do at this point for the first time in the game is to create something that was really epic. So we go from that shift in scale where it's very intimate and small to suddenly realising that this is an extraordinary and magical place to be, as well as a difficult and quite sad and melancholic place to be. So the string players were instructed at this point to play with much more vibrato. Up until this point they've played in a very sort of Scottish style actually, no vibrato, very plain playing. But this was a really beautiful cue to write actually, because that has that scale. You suddenly realise that the island is really big, and you have this beautiful vista, and the music then shifts so the player can actually just for a moment, I think, enjoy being where they are.
Yeah, I think that's it. Can I? Yeah, I was going to say, this is actually one of my favourite parts of the game. It's just where everything, all the elements kind of come together perfectly. You've got the music, which just is just epic, as Jess has said. You've got the landscape, which is kind of like this big open space. You've got all the little bits and pieces that I put into the detail of the environment, like the movement, there's leaves blowing around, there's the clouds in the sky.
Inside the bothy, there is a randomised chance that you can find an ultrasound picture on the table, and I think it's the one instance of randomisation in the game that is like the pinnacle of it, because the idea that Esther was pregnant when she died changes everything emotionally about how you understand the story. I'm not saying you don't care as much if you don't find it, but it just adds this other layer of just the ground falls away from him the first time I saw it, and the meaning of the crash in Esther's death just means so much more when you go, it's not just about her, there is an unborn child here. And I think that's where the randomisation just hits its absolute peak, because it's one tiny detail that may or may not be there, but if it's there, it's going to fundamentally change the way you feel about the entire thing. And that's the strength that the randomisation elements in Esther kind of provide, that you go, your likely kind of feeling about the story and your understanding about the story can be changed so absolutely by the occurrence or not of one tiny little prop detail. And that's something which, those moments I think are what make it really, really special. So it's for me, it's almost like the most important prop in the game, because when it happens, it's so profound.
Yeah, and it's again, it's just something that makes each playthrough more personal, I think. This is what I love reading about, people finding these things and going, holy shit, I've just found this one thing that's going to change it. That's changed my interpretation completely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things that influenced the visuals quite a lot was the tech limitations at the time, and also the kind of themes of the game. Like, tech-wise, we were never ever gonna kind of achieve photorealism, and I think that was a good thing. I mean, really, it made us sort of stretch out into other areas, and for me as an artist, it kind of made me think a little bit more creatively.
We should probably talk about some of the inspirations behind it. I'm on a strict you don't talk about Stalker kind of thing going on here. But when Rob and I started talking, I think one of the first things that we kind of discovered was how much we're both obsessed with Stalker.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the major things behind it in terms of when people talk about game inspirations. I mean, for me, there's a lot of FPS stuff in there, Doom, System Shock, but I think Stalker probably more than anything else. And Roadside Picnic, the Strugatsky novel that Stalker's based on, of the idea of this incredible space that you didn't understand, that's simultaneously beautiful and threatening. And I think sort of Tarkovsky's kind of films kind of play into that as well, particularly his version of Stalker, that you want to have this place that you feel rather than think about. And for me, that was like really kind of core.
One of the more interesting and challenging things to do in the visual side of things is to kind of create an emotional connection with the player. With the music, it's very strong, and the dialogue can kind of help you to feel what the character's feeling, but to kind of really create an atmosphere and to create emotion, it's very difficult. So I designed a few.
One of the really important images in the game is the radio mast, and the soundscapes that I wrote for the game are really tied into this idea. So it's the concept of the tortured sounds that they're so broken down, they're so manipulated, and it.
This is another of my favourite bits in the game, where you come along the edge of the sort of gully and you find hundreds of books, and it's one of the first times where most explicitly there's the suggestion that nothing you're seeing is real, because there's just no way that this can exist, and it's a really amazing, uncanny moment. But it works, I think, for me, because you just go, I don't understand it, but it's lodged somewhere in my head and I can't get rid of it and I can't unsee this. And I think for me, like in terms of my influences from books, I mean, there's the obvious sort of stuff like with Burroughs, Cut Up and things like that going on. But it comes to the kind of books that I really love, that like Roadside Picnic, or the other one by the Strugatskys as well, I absolutely love, is The Ugly Swans, that's just full of these images that you go, I don't understand, I literally have no idea what's going on here, but I can't shake it, it's just got its hooks in me. And I think more recently you've got books like Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation does this so well, where nothing is understandable, but you feel the logic, but you can't understand the logic, but you feel like the logic's there. And that, I think, is a really powerful thing that games are so good at doing, of creating these things. And I think where a lot of game writing for me becomes kind of the wheels fall off it, is that they have these amazing ideas and then suddenly there's this huge rush of going, right, we've developed this mythos and we've shown you all the tips of the iceberg, which are really interesting, but now we're just going to show you the whole iceberg. And actually that's never that satisfactory as a player, because it robs the mystery. And I think the best game writing is those kind of moments where you go, I feel like there's something just outside the edge of my vision or just on the edge of my hearing, but it's the confidence to go, that's it, that's all you get, and the rest of it is up to your imagination. And I think it does loop back to games like Stalker. I think Skyrim at its best does it so well, where you just have these moments where you think, I want to know, but it's going to be down to my imagination to draw those things. And the player's imagination is the most powerful thing you've got in your design kit. There is nothing you can put on screen, there is nothing you can do with audio, there's nothing you can do with dialogue that will ever be as powerful as the player's own imagination. So if you oversell the idea and oversell the image, what you're actually doing is you're kind of not only robbing the player of the opportunity to invest in the game, but you're also fundamentally opting for a weaker tool than what the player can bring to the experience themselves.
I say, Mick, how you doing? Work.
The caves in the game are really interesting because it's a very tonal shift within the whole visual look of the game. It's kind of like this more organic, more surreal, dreamlike landscape compared to what you used to.
Much appreciated, man.
It's
Thank you so much.
We kind of used the visuals and this kind of unreal theme very subtly, but here it's kind of at the forefront, and it's, to me, has kind of been designed as this kind of journey through the inner self, through the body, and it's really designed to be a very.
This for me is probably the most pivotal music cue in the game, and it's the one that most people write to me
game
about, say
volume
that they
is
are
much
absolutely
louder than
obsessed
your
with and they
voice.
love. It's the only music cue that has singing. It has a female voice, and I think that's a really important
How is
shift
now?
for me, that you've gone from this beautiful string
How is
music
now,
that is
Sammy?
quite abstract into what is effectively a song, and with lyrics, so you're actually explicitly saying something as a composer at this point. The other thing that I think it's important to say for me is it's the biggest shift from the music that I wrote for the mod. It's the same music, but the act of having it sung
Still pretty
by
loud.
an amazing singer. I sang it on the original and it's really bad. And Clara Sanabras re-recorded it, and it's what good actors do, it's what Nigel Carrington did, it's what good musicians do, and they take something that you've created and they just shove it up into the next level and make something that's good into something really extraordinary. And also for me, I think it's a point where the environment art and the music.
I just want to say that I think you can divide caves in games into pre and post Dear Esther. I
It seems
think
that,
that it's just
you
a
know,
way of breaking away from reality into saying what you can do with these spaces that actually makes them this incredibly, much more vividly colourful and much more kind of interpretative and look for it. And it's really interesting that I look at caves now in games and I find myself going, that's a very Rob Briscoe cave.
Thank you.
And I think that's an amazing thing to have achieved. So I think it's one of those. It's great paying other people's work.
Thank you,
compliments.
Sammy.
I enjoy that because you never feel like you're being big-headed about yourself. But I think it is. I think when you're designing a game, it's very easy to get very locked into what the system can do. And you're trying to deal with all the different variations of things that if a player does this, then this. And we have to deal with the consequence here. And our lead designer, Andrew, and I talk about this all the time, about you might have an idea, but then how does this radiate out throughout the entire system? And you get very caught in the idea of what the system has to be and how robust the system has to be and this kind of thing. And I think what's really important
You
as
don't
a
talk when they
sort of a
do.
designer, as a creative,
And you
is that
be
understanding
perfect.
that actually the real game is happening in the player's head.
Yeah.
And that the system can be whatever
Time
you
for
want
the
it to
deep.
be. But if the game isn't running in the player's head as opposed to on the screen, then you're missing a trick. You're not letting the game be everything it could be. And I think the great thing about working with a game as simple as Esther in a way is that those sort of consequences of player interaction, there's not a huge number of them in the way that there might be with a very mechanically complex game. What's really important to me is that Dear Esther started out as a Half-Life 2 mod, and if the Half-Life 2 modding community hadn't championed it and celebrated it and downloaded it a lot and talked about it and loved it, then it would never have been a game. So it's never really bothered me, the kind of is it a game conversation, because as far as I can see it, Dear Esther and like everything that's come after it's been inspired by it, this was championed by Half-Life 2 modders, and they made it what it is. And so if
Dear Esther was my first foray into writing music for games, and I actually approached it very traditionally, so more as a film score than a traditional interactive
Thank
game
you for
music
hosting
score.
me.
And what's really interesting for me is that the lack of interactivity in the music was never a problem for anybody that played the game. And that's a separate discussion, but there's a big schism between game music composers of how much the music should be following the player at all times in terms of interactive music. But one of the reasons I wanted to say something at this point was that
I don't know when the paper origami boats first came into things with Esther really, but it felt like a really amazing
No
metaphor
problem,
of
gotta
taking
get
these
to work. But
letters and
in
folding them
later,
into boats
you're
and
still
then
on.
letting them leave the island, because you kind of, you know at this
Okie
point in the
dokie.
game is kind of the realisation is there that this isn't going to end well, and that the narrator is
Have
never
a
leaving the
have a
island.
nice day.
And the idea that this kind of, again, in a lot of ways, the caves were the hardest area of the game to actually write, because we knew we didn't want to have much voiceover in there. I think because of the strength of the music, and this goes right back to the original mod, we wanted that to be the voice and for it to be a chance for Esther to speak rather than the narrator. And we also wanted to have this break, so when the narrator came out from the caves, you had a real definite sense of something happening, and that he had changed as a result of this journey. So it meant really felt wrong to have a lot of voiceover within there, but then that made it really difficult, because then you had like 4 one-sentence.
The sound here is a classic case of, again, what music I think does really well, which is you've had this soft, lyrical, beautiful, epic, dreamlike music, and then the moment you come out of the caves, you're into this really harsh soundscape, and the tonal shift is very, very brutal, I think, and deliberately so. You have very little music when you come out of the caves. You hear the wind, and it's a classic case of foreshadowing. So we know from this point that things are probably going to get bleaker, more difficult. And yeah, it's something that music does really well, I think, which is that.
This whole area moved, didn't it? The original mod, this was a cave right at the beginning of the caves, where
Hello,
it moved to the back end of the level, and we had this long corridor that's full of these kind of it's the point of high madness, I think, in the game, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of just where you feel like you're losing the plot completely, both like visually and
You're going to love this game.
Auditory and you know, it's
Away
kind of
from
like
being
this really
a city.
frenetic moment for me.
I think it's where you feel most that you're underneath a mountain, and you feel the weight of that mountain, and just I loved the idea when we were, putting through it of what would it actually take to do this, like to actually paint all these symbols and what is going on, and it really is quite an explicit kind of thing of madness of going, you would have to be insane or very, very disturbed to actually do this, and what is the process that this person's trying to work through, what they trying to achieve by this. And I think it really strengthened it, making it a crawl through a tunnel as opposed to just a static location.
Yeah, I think it's the consistency and the coherence of the symbols is a lot more broken down as well. Like you see some symbols before like scattered around the.
This is a bit more of a contentious one because we disagree on this one. I struggle with this. With the points in the caves where you duck above and below the water, and you have to have that transition of audio. And I love the audio on both sides of the surface tension of the water, but I really struggle with you breaking water because it's such a hard edge to the sound. And I don't think there's any other way around that. And you need to have those moments where you do go underwater because it's so important. But it's one of the areas that's never sat very comfortably with me because I feel like in a level which
This is more hard than Dark South.
Edge in it. It's the one edge within it, and it breaks.
And that's why I think it's so successful, because you've been lured into this completely hallucinatory, dreamlike world, and then all of a sudden, as a player, you're literally gasping for breath. You're
The motorway scene. The biggest new addition to between the mod and the commercial version. This didn't exist in the mod at all. It was a completely new thing.
Yeah, it's I wasn't sure where the idea spawned from to have this scene, whether I just sort of went off or we discussed it, or I can't remember.
Can you remember? It just kind of appeared, didn't it? And then
it was just this kind of. I think for me, actually, I remember being some technical difficulty between the drop and then coming out at the end part.
But
it was like
about it.
It was the same thing that we dealt with in the past of like, how do we
that will
not
help
kill the
you
player? From a technical standpoint, I think it might have been something to do that. But it was also, I can't remember where the whole.
I heard it's a 1 hour
it's my
game.
favourite point in the
I
whole
still don't
game,
know.
actually. I think it's just it's quite shocking, and it's so surreal, and it's so beautiful. And from an audio point of view, you have that baby's heartbeat bringing us back to the idea of the ultrasound. Was Esther pregnant? And it's one of those moments that I think everything just kind of collates together, and it's so unexpected.
Yeah, for me, it's like a moment of realization.
Yes.
It's like. It's coming to terms with something almost,
Whether or not what actually is going on at the moment is real, this did happen. There's kind of an absolute. I remember playtesting it, and I didn't know that the car can get switched out with a hospital gurney, and I must have played it. I was like 3 or 4 times into playtesting it. The first time it switched out and it was a gurney, so I really remember kind
So
of
this is a busy, another busy week. Count so many good
just stopped
games
in my tracks by it.
in this
And it's one of
week.
those weird things you get when you're making a game that you know you'll never have those moments that a player does, where you know it all so well. It's really, really rare to be in a situation where you actually get a genuine, fresh player's eye view on what you're making.
Yeah,
Are you going to stream today in the hidden level?
We've gone a bit too literal with that, but I think looking back at it now, there's still a lot of strangeness going on there. Obviously,
I'm
it's
waiting
the whole
for the
scene is
documentary to
unusual,
end to
but there's
see
still
if
these
I
like
can
very subtle
busy
details
for you.
that are there that kind of still making you think. What,
So
you know,
you
what
are
does that
you are
mean?
on
Like,
vacation?
I think if you look closely, there's like coins. scattered around
You are on
and
extreme
things like that.
vacation.
For me, it's, again, sorry to keep going on about it, but it's about layers of subconscious for me. That you start overground, you go into the caves, you go deeper, you're falling down, it's going down the rabbit hole effectively, and then you go to the deepest level, and that's actually the truth, that's the reality, that's what happened.
Okay, let's see if I can go. Nice, 1 p.m. Okay, don't go through. So what I need to do here? It's moving slowly. I did watch your Mount and Blade stream. And you playing it on multiplayer.
This scene for me is like really.
I'm doing progress
really
now
iconic
in the
because
game,
it kind of
Mount and Blade.
brings this idea of the caves being
I'm
a
digging it
deepwood
now,
journey through the body.
The combat mechanics
together.
are awful.
It's really kind of like a
Still
symbol of rebirth, and it actually
funny
brings together
to
a
play.
lot of the visual goals.
Yeah, I watched
that
that.
wanted to
I
achieve,
did see that you died
with a lot of symbolism in the
with
game.
the first enemy
Like,
that attacked you in the town.
I've talked a little bit about how
Yo,
the environment
I
is kind
think,
of designed
what?
to provoke
But
emotions
he is
and
a Dark
kind
Souls
of
veteran.
the
That should be
impressionistic
so easy.
style gives
to
you
him.
just enough information to make you think of things and feel things. But this is probably like the antithesis of this, and the whole feeling of rebirth here is
Yeah, I
quite
noticed
strong.
that. Was a
and
very
I
short
guess-
string.
Yeah, the music's really supporting that.
Yeah,
Because we've
it's-
gone, she sings always, always throughout, we've got always, always, and then she sings never, and a moment of absolute soaring. It's the climax of the music.
as you come out of the water and the music kind
You
of
didn't have a
swells
cheer.
and you just kind of, it is like a moment of change has happened
Yeah.
in some way, and I
It's
think
rebirth, isn't it?
Yeah.
For me, it's his moment of clarity and
Yeah.
acceptance and understanding of the reality of what's happened.
And you're
Yeah.
literally moving towards the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes.
You're actually doing that as you go through.
But the music, especially, I think before the music got layered in, that scene was nowhere near as kind of powerful for me. Like, that kind of just totally made it.
Okay. Let's see. Finally. So, Count, did you get Firewatch? I was going to string it, but I'm doing it later.
Dan and I had worked on lots of projects together, non-game projects, before we made Dear Esther. And I think the thing that links all of the projects that we've worked on together is that idea of hidden stories and layers of stories. And one of the things I wanted to do with the music was to embed
I don't know if there is an achievement for
little
the
hints and
documentary.
stories into
I did
it.
miss like
So
3 or
the
4
music
more
that you
commentaries.
hear has Morse code, and the Morse code is spelling out the word Esther. And I really, really liked this
Wow, man, you are
concept
very
of that some people
selective
would
on
understand
games.
that it was Morse code and try and figure out what it was saying. It also provided a really interesting
I thought
rhythmical
achievements
dynamic.
are
And yeah, it's just about these ideas of hidden
the
stories
only thing
and
that care,
layers.
the only
It
thing that
also
matters.
starts to emphasise the obsessional nature, I think, of the story in Dear Esther, and his agitation and actually slight panic. So you're getting this rhythm that just repeats and repeats and repeats
No, not yet.
obsessively.
It's
So I
admitted
think even if you
late.
don't understand. I'd been on holiday to Greece lots of times, and one of the things that I always really responded to emotionally was those shrines that you see on the road, and sometimes they're
There is an
dedicated
achievement
to
for the Esther
saints, and
commentary.
sometimes to
Yeah,
markate where an
maybe
accident
I
is taking
have to
place.
repeat the
So you
game
get
later
photos of
another
the
day
deceased person and
because I
flowers
did
and
miss
candles,
some
and it always
documentary
really
in
touched
other
me.
areas.
And so I said to Rob, I think it would be amazing to get these into the game somehow. And then Rob took that idea and ran with it. And I think they're so successful and they're so beautiful and they're really moving. And I think it's because you had this elemental scale. You have the island and it's huge, and you have
I don't
that
know if you can repeat
One of the
later.
really nice things about the move from mod to the commercial version is that we had a couple of
repeat
years
the-
worth of the community
the
talking about the
chapters
game before we went back into it again.
to
And
play the
one of the things that I
documentary
read on a
that
forum
you didn't
was that someone had
listen.
constructed this amazing version of the story where they'd decided that the narrator was Paul. And I hadn't thought of that. It was never part of the original writing. And I thought, that's so amazing that as a writer, your audience can find something in what you're doing that you hadn't thought of. So it was really important when we went back in to record the additional set of voiceovers. I thought, I absolutely want to do this. I want to take this idea that's come out of the fans and to run with this and to add an entire new sort of stream of story in there. So we added in a couple of cues within the fourth level that intimated much more strongly that actually
I wonder why
Paul wasn't this other character who
game,
caused the accident.
why the
but
name
actually
of
you
the
were
game is
responsible
Dear
for everything.
Esther.
But again, it was then trying to find that balance of not
I don't know
overcooking
if
it, so you weren't
that
led to
is
that
the
idea.
name of the
But just if you
island.
happen to have the combat.
I think one of the most fascinating things for me about planning this director's commentary has been that in previous years, when all the three of us have talked about Dear Esther, we've talked about the interpretation of the player, but actually going through this together, post having made
many
it, we're
documentaries
still
around.
surprising each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really interesting for me, because it shows that we left interpretation for each other and that we trusted each other actually just to get on with it. And because we each brought our own special and unique contribution to the game, we didn't have to, in a way, talk it to death or say you have to justify every idea you have or talk it to death or explain it. That Rob's idea that the island is very tainted and corrupt.
It's probably the level which has changed most from the original mod, I think. It's much, much bigger than the final level in the mod. One of the major changes in there is in the original mod, the whole side of the cliff face was covered in painting
There
and
is
writing.
another one.
And a lot of that moved inside to that corridor.
There will
in
be an
plays where it's
interesting
really
stream. Not
obsessionally
only
painted
will I
on.
be streaming
And it was
game,
really, we spent so
IVB.
long on that because we were trying to get it
or will be
looking
interesting.
right. Because it's one of those really interesting examples where I loved the image and the idea that you've got this
It will be doing
this
a quality
guy
test.
painting the entire side of a mountain with
That's
words
about
and
it's
symbols.
like the
and things.
only thing
But
I
it was
have
really interesting
to
when it
face
went into the rebuild.
before I get to
It
join
just
the team
never worked,
officially.
and I think it was because the environment was so crude in the mod.
I wish
that
you good luck.
Those symbols and that painting became the focus of the level, and it
and
changed the
let me
feeling
get
of
the
level
game maybe
completely, when
is,
actually that just wasn't something we could realise in any way that not even technically, but just didn't artistically look and feel right. And I think probably sort of
Pharaonic.
retrospectively looking back on it, that's about the sort of the sophistication and the subtlety that then came into the art, rather than just being this is literally just a canvas that we write words on, to actually the environment telling its own story without the story being literally painted on it.
Yeah, it was very difficult when we were experimenting with that to kind of like make it not completely unreal. Like, I think for me it was kind of, I wanted to kind of bring the player a little bit back into reality after the caves. and I think with having those symbols everywhere, it was kind of pushing them out a little bit.
I don't
think what we came
understand
to, the
still
kind of compromise we had,
these
it was kind of a
quality
nice
issues
in between.
because
Yeah, I
when
didn't feel like a
I
compromise to me.
check
No, I felt
recommend,
like it didn't work, but it kind of. But those symbols
is
were coded like
recommend
there's the hill
2000
in the
something,
background,
and
you're standing
then I
right at the
play
end of
on
the boat, and you look
2000
backwards.
something, and
You suddenly realise that the shape of the mountain is the shape of a woman.
I start
lying on
getting
side
the
asleep. And
error
I remember
that
seeing it for the
I
first
need
time
to
around
load
and going,
the
it's saying the
quality,
same things, but it's saying it in a
etc.,
much,
etc.
much subtler way.
So
than,
I do play
in the initial layer, but
I
it
do
was
change
definitely challenging going back to
to
how
low
you
quality.
have a deep, complicated, subtle art style, but still manage to have something which is very sort of stark.
What's fascinating to me, Dan, is that you're an atheist, but each of the three
That being
games
said, it
that
can
we've
go
made
on.
are so
That
strongly
being said,
about
it can
religion,
go
either
on
the
of two
language
ways.
or
One
taking allegories
way
and
I can find a
stories.
better quality
Why are you so
realistic
drawn to it?
with after that,
I think
or I
I'm
will
really
have
interested
more
in
issues.
people
Speaking
and
of from shining quality
the
around.
stories that make up people.
Yeah, that's why I
And
stick
I
with
think
one quality
There
to
is
avoid that.
like in the Bible and most
Um,
kind of religious texts, it's not
is
about what it is,
the
it's about what is
lower
behind what
one.
it is, and that's what you're really getting to, is the idea of the sort of the parable or the metaphor. And it really felt like, particularly with
I recommend it
Paul
not
on the road to
2000
Damascus,
something.
it's a story that many
Yeah, I
people know and
noticed
can
that
understand.
when
It's
I do
about
play
redemption,
2000
consequence, and
or
guilt, and
2000
transformation. And
400, it's really
is Dear
bad
Esther a
for me.
depressing game or a hopeful game?
For me, it's kind of like a mix of both.
I
Really. I think
sometimes I can
like,
play
my-
the game
my
nice,
interpretation is kind
and
of
I
like,
can watch
I always feel
screen
like
working
kind of
nice,
depressed
but
when I think about the
the
kind of turmoil that
viewers
this guy's been
say
going through
that
for
they don't.
God knows how long, and the kind of environment
They
he's
get a
been
lot of
in, and,
buffering,
you
etc.,
know, all these
etc.
events
So yeah,
surrounding
I
his
don't know
story. But for me, I always feel like a little
how
bit
I only
hopeful
play
at the end. You know, like the conclusion
on
is
the
just
lower
feels
at
like
the
a
moment.
relief, and like this is kind of all
even
ended in some way. What do you think, Jess?
I think it's a game about acceptance, and I really like that. And I think it's telling that a lot of people with mental health issues have responded really positively to the game, and we get a lot of emails and letters from those people saying that it's helped them through a really difficult time. And for me, that's because it's about the struggle of being human.
Yeah, mine is very
that
low
it's hard, and
at
that
the
we
moment.
love, and that we grieve, and we lose, but we come through it. And those
But
things are
I'm
what
doing
makes us
that
human.
way
That it's
because
transformative, and that the pain is part of
um,
life. And that's a
to
really
avoid the
beautiful
error
message. And
that I was getting
that's
that
what you do so
made
well, Dan.
my
That's what you
screen
write
crash
about.
a lot
You
of
write
time.
about what it is to
I
be
don't
human.
want to try to
So
get
Dan,
it better.
you wrote it.
So
Um,
to avoid getting that error again and trying to fix it again,
Dear
because
Esther is
it's
the first walking
it's really a
simulator.
peer trying to
How do you
Yeah.
feel about
trying to
walking
be
simulator?
trying to trying to
You
fix
know what,
that error.
I think I took offense to it when it first became a thing, but
I'm so tired
no, I
of
think I don't mind it so much now.
uninstalling
I
and
think the fact that
installing
we
the
have kind
Twitch
of
app,
taken ownership over it. Like that genre has been
deleting my
uh,
wow, man,
made our
I
own by
really
not just our game,
know
but like a
the
bunch of different games have kind of embraced it.
troubleshooting step
I don't know, what do you
for
guys think?
for it as
I'm
well.
also really confused about the need to categorise
A
in
to
games,
Z.
probably more than any other creator.
There's a bit of an illusion of simplicity with games
There
like
is
Dear
a
Esther
ghost
that
in
people
this
kind of
game
assume, because there's
that
not a lot
is
of
being-
mechanics and there's not
that's
much
been watching
going
you
on in that sense,
through
they're
the
very
whole
easy to
game.
make. And I
I'm
think
watching
actually it's
so
kind of the opposite in a
on
way,
Crash.
that because
Oh wow, I didn't
they're
know
so
that
simple,
about the
everything
about
is
the ghost.
exposed and everything has to be
really
exceptionally good for it to work, because you're carrying the player's
Nice
experience on a
addition.
fairly sparse, minimal kind of framework, and that
Also,
really means that every aspect of it
maybe
has
the
to
ghost
be
is the
produced at a
Esther.
really high quality and has to be done with a lot of passion and a lot of thought. There's nowhere to hide in a game like Esther, and that's something.
One of the things that I think was added
Now
more
I'm
frequently
getting it.
in the final version of Dear Esther was
Now I
the
got
inclusion
it.
of a number of ghosts in the game.
More
These
or
are not
less.
like ghosts that you'd see in a normal horror game. They're just very loose silhouettes that you'll see around the island, usually like quite a distance off, or just kind of somewhere that you'd barely see it out the corner of your eye. I think this is a
they
good
mention
example
it.
of
Nice.
where it's kind of really in your face. And these are kind of just something that we put in to kind of not just bring some unreal elements to the island, but something supernatural as well, something that's kind of beyond this world, something kind of
Where at
unsettling.
least it's not Emily
And yeah,
wanting to play.
a lot of effort's been put in to make these things very subtle. I didn't really want them to be like, I didn't want this to be a ghost story, so to speak, but I just... So here it kind of, the environment becomes a little bit more surreal again. We kind of play with the colors a little bit, bring up the saturation. It's kind of a little bit of a return to some of the more cave-like aesthetics in terms of colors and stuff like that. And it's kind of there to kind of signpost another significant moment in the game, or something that's leading up to the significant moment. It goes back to this kind of idea of having these emotional signposts in the visuals of the game, without it being overly obvious. And some of that emotional stuff comes through just through the color.
The music that's playing here is a repeat of another cue, and originally we hear it played on the piano, and the string quartet take on the piece here. And it's one of those really nice instances where we were in the studio and I had this
really
idea
like
of
the
how it was
art
going to
style of the
sound,
game.
and I thought it was going to be quite full and rich and full-bodied. And then one of the string players said to me, "This is wrong actually for what we're playing."
No, I didn't. This is my first
It was
breakthrough,
possible that this
and
last section
I
of the
did
game could have felt quite laborious
with
and
the-
forced because it's
the
two long,
commentary,
zigzagging paths that just go up, and there was
I didn't know
a
what's
real
going to
importance
be
to getting it right.
this
Quite a lot
way.
of work went
So-
into it. I think at this point,
So
for
many
me,
documentaries so
you
close,
probably as a
and they
player
are so
understand
long.
that the narrator's going to die at the end, and that this is it. And that unlike
I
where
have
the
to
rest of the
stop
island, there's this sense of this could
I
just
want
keep
to
going
listen
on
all
forever
the
and ever and ever. And
documentary
you
and
keep the
wait.
the motif of come back.
So I
But I
can
think when you set on this path,
read the order, so I
you
can
really wanted to have
I
that sense of this is it. This is the last time you're going to walk these paths. This will end now, and that sort of idea of going, you're kind of climbing towards your death, but you're also moving towards a point where that glimpse in the caves where you see the motorway, and you go, I understand what this is about. For me,
This is
the
my
whole
first
path up the side of the
playthrough
mountain is
of the game.
With the climb being quite a poignant moment of the game overall and of the story, it was quite a difficult
Wow, this is
task to
nice.
try and
So many
make that climb
things riding.
still interesting and not too
The
laborious, because it's kind of this zigzag up there with nothing really. There's no real environment. You just kind of have the sea on one side and the cliff face on the other. So there was quite a lot of work that went into kind of building up this feeling of tension as you're rising and kind of making this moment as poignant as possible.
Well,
while
next
still
time
making
I
it
will
interesting.
play without the commentary.
So a lot of effort was put into
I thought was going
building
to
up
be
this weather, building up the wind,
vice versa.
and the swaying of the grass, and kind of the volume.
I thought I was
of the
going to
soundscapes
understand the
and,
story better
uh,
with the
everything mixing
commentary,
together
and
with
you
the
say that
music, and
it's the
just kind
other
of
way.
visually really trying to make this a tense moment, and I think it's hopefully been pulled off all right. You'll notice when you get to the top, this kind of tension dies, and that's very purposeful. You'll see no more wind. It's just kind of like a symbolic thing where you're coming to the last moment, the point of no return, and that's been very deliberately designed that way.
We had a lot
Everything is
of
close
debates,
now.
didn't we, about the ending of the game and whether the player should retain control or whether it was okay to go to a cutscene at this point. I personally don't mind it. I actually actively like it because I think it works really well as a metaphor for loss of control at that point. Dan, I know you're not as keen.
Yeah, I'm not. I would have loved the player not to have had control taken away from them, but to me it was a balance between two evils: the evil of having a cutscene and the evil of the player accidentally falling off the ladder halfway up and destroying the ending.
Yeah, I agree. I think we tried a few different things, and the tech at the time just wasn't, the ladder tech at the time just wasn't there. So, and the other thing for me was pacing. It was making sure all the music, the voiceovers, the timings and everything were perfect for that final jump off point, and just letting the players kind of noodle around going up a ladder for what may have been like 7 minutes because it's a tall tower.
Well, is this is going to end now? Maybe
kind of an impossible task.
Play another game. I don't know.
One of the things that I enjoyed the most on working on Dear Esther was
Yeah, the
Rob's
visual were
beautiful
so
visuals
inspiring.
were so inspiring, but Dan's words are always so amazing to write to. I think that's where we start as a partnership. And the music at the end was so easy to write because that last voiceover is the pinnacle of the writing to me, as it should be, because it's the last VO, so you would have failed if it wasn't good. But it is just so beautiful and moving. And for me, talking about whether it's a hopeful ending, the music is really hopeful at this point. And it signifies to me transformation, freedom, escape, acceptance. Yeah, and it was just a beautiful cue to write, actually.
I don't know, can't remember quite where it came from in the mod, but the moment when we went, or we could put the bird in there, and you could see the bird's shadow, and actually it turned from being kind of like a straightforward literal suicide into
So the narrator,
a metaphorical, or to my mind, kind of like, I always really believed the narrator did turn into a bird just before they hit the ground, and that was really important. I think it's probably the strongest ending in any of our games so far. But yeah, I'm very proud of the way everything came together in that last section.
Yeah, I think it's the bird thing is particularly interesting because I think it was in the original mod, but the timings and everything were just all off, and you never really saw the seagull. Yeah, at least the shadow as well. It was all kind of like a little bit broken. And I remember when we went back in, I made a real effort to try and get that shadow just out of the center of the view, so you kind of have this hint of something happening, and I think you can hear the sound of a seagull flapping its wings. It's like very subtle, but like you say, I kind of really like the way that came together. It kind of it's very like say it's kind of like a release, but at the same time there's still this kind of ambiguity there that's kind of beautiful.
And I'm really proud that I got the monitor in at the end for an ending of, it goes into the hospital monitor signifying the flat line. And I think it's it's one of those moments where you never want to be so clever that people notice it and it takes them out of the moment, but it just flows in through the music, and it just feels like
it more
everything
with
comes together
narrator
at that last point. That last
I have to
Rob's
try the
amazing visuals
narrator.
and the music. And it feels like a really, really strong and beautiful ending.
And then in the last second, Nigel Carrington's delivery of
Because
just those
there
two words
was
have come back.
something
just
that
pitch
I didn't
perfect.
understand. Also, I need to play again.
So that's the end of the
director
director's commentary.
commentary.
We'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone for listening. We hope you've uncovered some
Check what
secrets
I did
and
miss
some facts that you didn't
and
know
get
about the game before.
achievement, but
We'd also like to say a
That will
huge
be
thank
another
you for
day.
buying the game, and for all our fans who've been behind us and
Maybe
been behind the
I-
game and have kept
maybe
it
I'm
alive all
going
these
to
years. It's a
stream,
real privilege to
the
that
new
it's still out
Artifest
there,
Mundi
still such
game,
a title that people love so much.
Yeah, and we're really looking forward to the future and
Slavic Favor.
what we can create coming up next. Thanks for listening.
Cheers.
Bye.
I wonder if there is an achievement for the credit. Oh well. Well, there was an achievement for touch, like for arms. I didn't know. I didn't see nothing that I could interact with. So that is one that I will go to find. I was 90% to get. I am 90% to get the rock 5,000 steps, something like that. That is the audio achievement, the documentary achievement. I guess the audio achievement are for the narrator one. Breakthrough. Another secret achievement that I don't know what is. Well, I'm going to change game to play another one. Thank you for stopping by. You want to see a Slavic Fable gameplay, so don't go and wait. I'm streaming it in a few